Shalom. Welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Delmar, together with my co-host Mark Ronich of Statewide News Service, jbiztechvalley.com, and now, as you can see, columnist for the Jewish Press.
I'm having a lot of fun doing all of that and writing about government and how it relates to the Jewish community, or doesn't, as the case may be. Well, one of our guests today is, we always love to have law and order, and we always love to have judges on whenever we can, and we've had a few. But we got Judge Larry Rosen, who was a city court judge and a county court judge. Welcome to the Jewish View.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
It's great to have you here. It really is an honor.
It's an honor to be here with both of you.
It's an honor. Tell us, what was you were a city court judge in the early 80s?
Yes, I came to Albany as, it's interesting because for hundreds of years, being involved in the political process in our great capital city was really a function of your being and having relatives, shall we say, in the being one of the good old then only boys in our city. When I came to Albany in the mid-'70s and commenced the law practice, it started to become open to, so to speak, carpetbaggers, the process itself. Politics always interested me, and I got involved with the Democratic Party as a committeeman and a young lawyer. It just so happened that one of the areas that was within my purview was South Pine in Albany. And as I walked the district to get signatures, this is what committeemen do, I met Tom Whalen, and he always liked to talk politics. He expressed a desire to become the mayor of our fair city, and we had lots of talks about that. As it turned out, when he did become mayor, keeping his eye on that ball after Corning no longer was with us, Whalen succeeded him. And one of his first acts when he had an opening for a city court was to appoint me a city court judge. And that is essentially a criminal court with mostly misdemeanor jurisdiction.
Were there Jewish judges on before you?
Well, yes, there were.
But few and far between.
Few and far between. One might say legend has it, but I think the reality, if you read Bill Kennedy's Oh Albany, would back this up. When the O'Connell-Corning machine controlled everything in this area, which they did for half a century, they always made sure there was a token Italian judge, a token Jewish judge. So all of the groups would at least appear to be represented in the grand coalition. So yes, there were previously, but it was apportioned very carefully, apportioned out. That's changed, of course. Of course.
But I still think Rachel Kretzer is the only other Jewish judge that we might have had since you.
Well, you recall Leonard Weiss, I'm sure, and he was, and Leslie Stein, who recently was elevated to the Court of Appeals. And I mean, you can trust me, there have been other examples, but not too many.
Not
too many.
And Leslie and Rachel were both on this program in the past. So
Yes.
Judge Weiss doesn't want to come on for some reason, but that's okay.
He is an idiosyncratic man and does as he pleases, I suppose, but it's hard to believe anyone could forego this opportunity.
When the judges were on, as Mark was saying, we were bemoaning, lawyers, a Jewish profession, really. I mean, there's just so many Jewish lawyers. I mean, just from the Talmud, as you'd say, from maybe the rabbinical roots, the learning Talmud. But they found it interesting, I guess that's Mark's leading up to. There really aren't that many judges at city level, county level, even at state level, compared to, you would think, as Jewish lawyers would be overrepresented instead of underrepresented.
Well, yes, but you have to take Rabbi, you have to take into consideration, of course, the political system, which is so involved in the selection of judicial candidates in the first instance, that is always going to be a factor. But, for thousands of years, Jews have loved to argue, and so you become a lawyer. So and that's the old story that there was a little town in Nebraska, and there was one attorney, and he was one Jewish attorney, actually, but he couldn't make a living, just couldn't make a living. Nobody was going there. And he was going to move out of town. But what happened is a second lawyer moved into the community. Now they're both wealthy, okay? So the idea of conflicts on two sides needing two lawyers took hold, let's put it that way.
Well, competition's always good, is always good.
For everybody,
Yeah,
for all concerned.
And then you moved on to county court.
Yes,
You had to run for that?
yes, I was elected as the county court judge.
That's just for the system of it, just to get it clear also, city, you're appointed, and then county
No.
after?
Well, no,
He
you're,
was appointed, but then he ran for election.
that's correct. When there is a vacancy, the mayor of the city can appoint, but typically that would mean that there would be an election the following November. But primaries are not something in the DNA of Albany for those hundreds of years. So it being a Democratic city, the designation by the Albany County Democratic Committee that you are the candidate was for over a century tantamount to election, as it would be in Brooklyn, to be nominated by the Democratic Party, as in Utah, to be nominated by the Republican Party. But all judges in the state of New York are elected, keeping in mind the caveat I just set forth. You have to get the nomination of a major party, except for the highest court in the state, the Court of Appeals, which is appointed by the governor.
All right, good,
And
thank you.
confirmed by the Senate.
Correct.
Yes. And so then you moved on to county court.
Yes, and that is now, I was the county court judge throughout the 90s, and that's a different story, whereas in the city court, the amount of liberty involved in a human being's appearance before you is somewhat limited by, as I told you, misdemeanor charges. However, the amount of pain is tremendous that comes into those doors. In county court,
Which way, give us an example, meaning like neighbor against neighbor, you're saying?
well, misdemeanors as opposed to felonies. So it could be a simple assault where you're not injured badly. It could be a harassment. It could be a possession of a small amount of drugs, not necessarily selling them, but possession of them. Relatively minor disputes, but there can be domestic violence involved. The pain that I'm not attempting to say that the pain that goes through those doors each morning is not extraordinary, and writs of Rahmanis are certainly necessary if you sit as a judge in a court like that. But once you go to county court, you're dealing with the major crimes that are committed within the county, and the county court judge becomes, to some degree, both the conscience and the hammer of a community.
Very good.
So you ran twice for county court judge, or?
No, it's judgeships, the proof of the pudding that lawyers must write the laws is that judicial terms range from 10 to 14 years, okay? So I served one 10-year term in the county court bench.
And why did you leave?
Well, frankly, the departure, which is somewhat unusual when you're not run out of town, and I wasn't run out of town, or run out of town by a judicial commission or something like that.
Retirement.
Well, mandatory, that's different. I hadn't reached the mandatory retirement age. When you are dealing with people's liberty on a day-to-day basis, if you take it seriously, it's going to be a burden emotionally. And if you're dealing with the major crimes, the murders, the rapes, the horrible things that occur in a community on a day-to-day basis, you're seeing a lot. I think the defining moment for me was when a sentencing came up and I could hardly remember the defendant anymore. Once there was an emotional disconnect between the act of placing someone in incarceration and my complete involvement in that individual's life and what led us to that point, it was time for someone else to take over. That is frankly the answer to the question.
And how old are you now?
I don't like to think about that.
No,
That's
no,
why I'm
because
taking,
because
that's why I'm taking a minute. 68,
You
68.
see, you still hadn't reached mandatory retirement, even
To this
today.
day, to this day. I'm not running again for a judicial office,
But
that's
you
for
went-
sure.
But one of the major cases that you had at county court was the Ralph Tortorici case.
That was the most extraordinary.
And that was the guy at University of Albany who shot up a lecture center, and he was tackled by one of the students there, and then he hung himself or killed
Well,
himself in prison.
that happens many years later. Ralph Tortorici was a 26-year-old tortured individual who one day in his psychotic state, essentially, when he wasn't taking medication, actually held 37 students at the University of Albany hostage for a matter of many hours.
1993 this was.
Yes, he had a rifle with rounds that were 5 or 6 inches long. He shot a few rounds through the ceiling of the lecture hall that he took over. He knew the campus. He was able to utilize hose to keep the doors secure. He separated the largest males in the class, which is a military move in a hostage-taking situation, and put them in various corners. And this was a 4-hour traumatic kidnapping of 37 young people, which tragically ended when there was a young man by the name of McEnany, not related to the
Spelled
local.
differently too.
Yes, and not related to the local McEnany family. And he was one of the, a scrapping, handsome 19-year-old, and he was one of the ones who was placed in the corner by Tortorici. And he moved or something, and Tortorici took the rifle and put it in his chest, and Jason thought he was going to be murdered at that moment, and decided, in ways that how could any of us understand, he decided to go for it and attempted to twist the rifle away from Tortorici. Unfortunately, Tortorici was a very strong wrestling background and resisted enough so that a round went off and unfortunately severely injured young McEnany. I don't want to give you the details of the injury, but they were quite unfortunate, to say the least,
Yeah.
and life-altering, to say the least. At which point, the football player, an African-American student who was one of the other ones in the class, jumped in. A few of the males jumped in. Of course, most of the rest of the class was just completely hysterical. Once the shot went off, it took the officers a few minutes to actually get into the room, believe it or not. The crack hostage team for the state police, hostage negotiation team. And then the trial itself was a 1-month trial of Tortorici with a psychiatric defense. Was actually probably the highlight of my judicial career.
And Jason McEnany survived.
He did survive.
Yeah, it's just he had that permanent injury in his lower parts of his body.
That's correct. That's correct. By the way, he never would be able to naturally have a family again.
Right.
That's the kind of, so when I say life-altering injury,
Yes.
I meant it.
And the other gentleman who jumped him, the other student who jumped him, he was.
The other hero?
No one else got injured, right?
No one else was physically injured.
Mentally injured.
Well, the psychological injury continues to this day
Sure.
of some of the young people who were in that class who thought they were going to be executed.
23 years ago.
And it was a 4-hour ordeal before they were freed.
And again, you said this was the
Well,
Pinnacle or the?
Well, the trial,
the-
Bill Moyers got interested in the trial.
Frontline,
It
right?
was on Frontline. They did a whole episode with the prosecutor, the defense lawyer, and myself,
Right.
because what we had in this case was the collision between the criminal justice system and the mental health system. The question being, should Ralph Tortorici be held legally responsible for his actions?
You know, that's interesting, because we had a state senator, and, recently we have so many politicians on the show, Mark and I, and he just said so many people that are incarcerated, they're not criminal, but they're mental cases. And I visit prisons myself. One of my functions as a rabbi, and it is true. It's hard to, a criminal act is a criminal act. Who cares who, is.
Well, there are certain legal standards if you can, but the idea of, one can be held in New York State not guilty of a criminal act if one is found to be not legally insane. I won't get into the details of not knowing the difference between right and wrong, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, at the time of the act itself. But it's very difficult, and that was the defense that was proposed for Tortorici. But in the end, it's a jury question, and you're taking 12 human beings from the community, having them decide a question that you really should have 12 psychiatrists deciding, of course, not knowing the nature and consequences of one's action, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it really comes down to, in the end, Rabbi, that those 12 people were not going to want to be the vehicle putting Ralph Tortorici back on the street again so that their child could be at the University of Albany and held hostage sometime if he failed to continue to take his medication.
It's interesting.
And
Yeah.
your quote from the Frontline interview was, "You can't take 12 average people who have never contemplated the legal insanity defense and give them the authority to make these determinations."
Well, then I guess you can at least
And you just
give me,
paraphrased that.
I guess you can at least give me some credit for consistency
That's
then,
right.
can't you? Okay.
But I did print out the
I-
Frontline interview, and it was quite fascinating to hear what you've been saying here, and that it's all here now.
Well, that was real, unlike,
It's like yesterday. for you.
unlike Trump's apprentice, that was the real world that we were dealing in at the
Because
time.
It really is, like, you're recalling this so vividly that you really have.
Oh, it
really
was,
was
when one is presiding over a case that has the total interest of the community, the press, et cetera, you're not toiling in anonymity. And so any fumble that you might make is going to be right out there for the world to see. So this was, as I say, it was an intellectually very challenging time, that Tortorici case. There were other cases that, shall we say, garnered the attention of the community that I presided over. But that can wear on one over time.
Mhm. And I can imagine.
As I said, you're both the conscience and the hammer of the community.
You were like the Judge Ito of that time, I guess.
Well, although it didn't take me a year to try the case,
No, that's for
okay?
sure. It took
And
you
I
a
think
month.
I hope I held the lawyers a tiny bit under better control than he did, but anyway.
So, you said that you came to Albany in the 70s.
Correct.
Where did you grow up? What did you?
Well, like Bernie Sanders, didn't we all grow up in Brooklyn? I mean, yes, of course. Where else does one grow
I'm
up?
from Mill Basin.
Yeah, well,
Okay,
well,
so
I
what
went to
neighborhood?
Lincoln. You mean there are people that didn't grow up in Brooklyn?
1/5
Okay.
of the
I'm
country.
from Chicago over
Yeah.
here.
No kidding. So I grew up in Brooklyn, and unlike my friends who all went to either Brooklyn College or Queens College or City College
Kingsborough.
or Kingsborough, community, or wherever, I escaped, in quotes, New York and went to Hobart College in upstate New York, where I met my wife in Albany, and that's what's going to wind up getting me back to Albany. And then I went to law school at Duke University, sitting next to one Ken Starr, believe it or not.
Really?
Yes, really. Would I kid you about something like that?
Small world, huh?
Yes.
Small world.
And after law school, third year of law school, it's the mid-'70s. My wife is, we're pregnant with our first child at the time, And her father was a physician in North Albany, and I had to study for the bar exam, so it was convenient to come to Albany, where I would study for the bar exam, where she would be home with her mom while this period of time would go by. And maybe in typical fashion, once I'm someplace, it's hard to get me to leave it. So
what
here I
made-
am.
Well, that's what happened with me. I came up here to go to college at the University of Albany, and I stayed up here one summer, fell in love with the place, and I never left.
And I agree that it's a wonderful place to live and raise a family, and that's what I've done.
What about the, what neighborhood in Brooklyn did you grow up?
Well, I moved a few times. I was born in Manhattan Beach, and I lived in Sheepshead Bay, Brighton Beach, and went to Lincoln High School, which is on Ocean Parkway, sort of the entrance to Coney
I went to
Island.
Lafayette.
Well, it's
We used to always beat you in sports.
in some sports, not all
Always had that
sports.
competitive edge, you know? So, but Lincoln has a lot
The
of
most
social-
famous pitcher,
Well,
Jewish
Sandy
pitcher, Sandy
Koufax.
Koufax. Where did
Lafayette.
it? Lafayette, yes.
Lee Mazzilli went to Lincoln, and
And we also have Arthur Miller, so we're not just sports, but anyway.
what do you see, you went, after the county court judge, you went into private practice?
I did. Since I had been involved in the criminal world for so long, I did specialize in criminal defense. And then a couple of years ago, I was asked by the county executive here in Albany to look into the Indigent Legal Services Program, which I am involved in to date.
To this day?
Mhm.
Have you closed up your private practice?
95% is closed up. There still are a couple of,
Cases?
the wheels of justice don't always grind quickly, let's put it like that, so.
But you're not.
I'm not
taking on
actively-
new
I'm not ta-
Cases, right,
Exactly.
unless someone personally, you know.
Well,
Like if I needed, no, I'm just joking.
That would, I would make an exception in that regard.
I wanted to, so tell us about the indigent cases that this policy you're working on.
Okay, I'll try not to get too involved with you because I wouldn't want to bore you. But in any event, about half a century ago, and I won't take you step by step through the half century, but just try the highlights. But about a half century ago, the United States Supreme Court decided the famous Gideon versus Wainwright case. And this was a case that created the proposition that if one were facing incarceration, one had a constitutional right to an attorney. Gideon was an illiterate who was accused in Louisiana, I believe, of stealing something or other, wasn't represented and wound up with a 5-year term, and he, believe it or not, wrote a handwritten motion to the United States Supreme Court, which led to one of the most famous cases in the Supreme Court's history. Well, in any event, the case went on to indicate that it was the state's obligation to afford someone who's facing jail time with an attorney. The state, in their infinite wisdom and how they usually operate, is rather than accept the appropriate burden which had been given to them, they dumped it on the counties. And so each county had to, on its own, create a method to assure that each individual received this constitutional obligation. Unfortunately, as time goes on, especially in all of New York State outside of New York City, as we started to lose population and as county governments became under more and more financial pressure, the quality of the services that were given to indigents became worse and worse and worse, so that we had a system of public defenders throughout the state who were each one might be every bit as good a lawyer as I am, but yet they were under-resourced and overburdened.
They couldn't perform to the best of their ability.
Not with the resources that were available and not with the amount of cases that were being dumped on them. It was humanly impossible. If you believe, as I do, that that the collateral damage from this is devastating to every inner city in our state. And so that because each time a young person is incarcerated who shouldn't be if they had proper representation, the collateral damage is enormous to an extended family. Every single morning, time and time again, in every, okay. So this is the area that our county executive, Dan McCoy, had me look into. I studied it for a number of months, a fascinating topic, and decided that the appropriate fix to the problem, if there were one, would be legislation that would require the state, not the county, to be in charge of the overall program, which would mean a more just system in general with uniform standards throughout the state, and money would have to be put into this.
So it would be like a state office of indigent services?
Yes, there is one, but it's very small, and yes, you're exactly right, Mark, that would be expanded to have jurisdiction over the whole state. So I prepared the legislation. Assemblywoman Fahey became interested in it, introduced it in the Assembly where it has 50 or so sponsors, but of course the idea of a Republican Senate suddenly becoming interested in the plight of indigents is problematical, to say the least. However, the county executives, typically Republican in Western New York, became intrigued with the idea because this is an unfunded mandate that would be lifted from their shoulders. So that conflict and our utilization of it, strategy-wise, a month ago about, Senator DeFrancisco, who's a powerful Republican senator, came on board. So I do hope that in the next year or two, this legislation will become the law of the land.
Wow.
So that's what I'm working on now.
And
That's
it could be called the
interesting.
Rosen law.
Yeah.
Well, it's, the boss was the county executive, and it's now actually called the Fahey Bill.
The Fahey bill.
I couldn't put it in the hopper, let's put it that way.
And he doesn't want it to be called the McCoy law?
Well, I call it for the McCoy-Fahey Bill, okay, but
Neil Breslin, how is he on this?
You know, I haven't really heard much from Neil with regard to this issue, though we spoke about it early on. You know, his being a Democratic senator in a Republican-run Senate, I'm not saying he could be the critical voice necessarily, but I would hope, but it would seem to me that from an intellectual standpoint, he would be in favor of this. And he indicated to me he
Is he
was.
on the bill? Is he one of the sponsors in the Senate?
Not to my knowledge.
Not to your knowledge. That's a shame.
But of course, there were 50 sponsors in the Assembly, and the Senate really, you know, is run by the other team, so to speak.
Yeah, but he could still put his name on the bill.
Maybe you'll ask him about that one
Well,
day,
he
Mark.
hasn't graced us with his presence, so,
If he does.
if he does, yes. So this is fascinating. Did you work with any of the public defenders about this, like Jim Milstein or?
Well, yes, Jim, who now is off and running to a new job, you work closely with all of the indigent legal services providers in the area. Jim was very helpful, to say the least, as were county attorneys and public defenders from most of the western counties.
What about legal aid? Do they feel, how do they?
Well, Legal Aid gave an award to Fahey for her work on this. I
Well,
mean,
I'm
they
just
did
saying,
do that.
They're underfunded, you know, they don't have very many funds, they're also strapped. Do they see this as a benefit to them that? it
I
would
don't think
help them?
directly, but you see, the difference is in upstate New York, the Legal Aid Society does not get involved in criminal matters. In New York City, they do. But upstate New York, you have the Public Defender and Conflict Defender's Office, and so if you went to a legal aid office right now with a criminal problem, they'd send you off to the Public Defender. They mostly handle civil, landlord, tenant,
Right.
that type of thing.
Mortgage. issue.
Yes,
they-
for indigents, that's true, but again, the universe that I'm working on is where people are in danger of being incarcerated.
Yeah, well, you know, there's, with DNA also, I mean, you're finding a lot of people, you know, who've been saying for years, you know, the sheriffs and all that would say, oh yeah, the jails are filled with innocent people. Well, we're now finding out with DNA that's true.
Look,
Everyone
one
is-
of the reasons why the bill has caught on is that the national debate with regard to mass incarceration and with regard to Black Lives Matter, those two movements are coinciding with my work in this arena, and they dovetail.
That's great. Well, congratulations on
Thank
that.
you.
I really think that's wonderful, you know, even after, you know, your practice is winding down and, you know, and you serve the people, thank you for your service and all that. I mean, it's just
Well,
really terrific.
it's kind of you to say that, and it's funny because I felt that I was going to ride off into the sunset. I was just looking for the white horse to ride off into the sunset with, and that's when this opportunity, but I guess I can't,
Well, it's a great way to
can't
cap-
resist an opportunity.
It's a great way to cap a career, it really is.
Well, thank you. I
hope
appreciate
you're
it.
around here for many more.
Judge, you're doing good work, you have done good work, keep it up, that's why you say Hashem is the Almighty is sending you more work because he doesn't want to lose a good man. So keep up and
Thank
do
you,
it with
Rabbi.
good health.
Yes.
And Mark, thank you both for having me.
Very well.